Greetings, Rays community. Brent coming in live from Northeast Iowa, McGregor to be specific. I am fortunate to be with my family, spending a little bit of time back in the Midwest where my wife and I grew up and met. And so we'll be recording several episodes of the Rays podcast from the home office here. I am thrilled to welcome Mike Wallace, who's the AVP for Development at Santa Clara University, to the show. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Brent. It's great to be here today.
So if you're all wondering, did we drive the motor home to get to Iowa? The answer is yes. And by yes, I mean my wife drove all but roughly 7 miles. She doesn't usually let me drive, as many of our listeners have come to learn. So we do have our motor home here. And I was just asking Mike, we're recording this on July 1st. It is the new fiscal year. I said, Happy New Year. What are you going to do to celebrate? And he told me that he and his family are...
We're renting an RV. We're following Brent's example here and flying to Vegas, renting an RV. We're going to hit up some national parks. We're going to hit up Zion, then Bryce, and then hit the south rim of the Grand Canyon. So it's going to be a fun week.
I love it. I can't wait to hear more. RV life is not for the faint of heart, but once you get good at it, it's a pretty liberating experience. So we'll have to recap that. But today we want to dive into your career path, really one of the most California-centric guests that we've had. You've worked the coast, you've grown up the coast, and I really want to dive into that journey. Let's start by going back to your junior year of high school at Notre Dame High School in Sherman Oaks. Who was Mike Wallace at that time? And did you know you wanted to be an advancement leader?
Oh, gosh, I don't even think I knew what advancement was at that time.
Tell me a little bit about your own decision to attend UC San Diego when you think about where you were that junior, senior year of high school.
Yeah, so grew up in LA. I knew I wanted to leave home a little bit and was looking at a few different options. I think probably my top two choices were University of Notre Dame and UC San Diego. I knew I wanted to run in college as I ran cross country and track in high school and was looking to continue that. So in the end, it came down to, I got waitlisted at Notre Dame, went out and met with the coach and thought about that. But in the end, I was thrilled with my decision to go to UC San Diego, and you can't beat running on the cliffs of La Jolla in January without a shirt on. You're not doing that in South Bend, I guarantee you.
That is for sure. And after having spent the last year traveling the entire country, and when people ask us, hey, what were some of your favorite places or where do we need to go? I mean, I've said this for a long time, but San Diego is an amazing place. It really is just an incredible lifestyle and a great place, I'm sure, to have attended college. And it sounds like you were able to blend that continued interest in athletics in addition to the academic program there.
Yeah, that's great. No, it's I look at my experience as I talk to prospective students that are looking at Santa Clara. I went to a big private school. Went to a big public school. I've worked at Stanford, which is, a medium-sized private school. And now at Santa Clara, and I look at the differences. I can describe the differences. And I think that's really helpful for students to think about what they're getting into. And, I always wonder what goes into a 17, 18-year-old's mind when they make that decision of where they're going to go for the next 4 years. So many different factors can play a role, but you really have to figure out what you think is the right program for you. And I think that's an important decision for a family to make as they're looking at where that student's going to go to for the next 4 years.
And you focused on the sciences in your undergrad studies. Great entry point into advancement. What was your intention as you were going down that path?
Yeah, so I was pre-med. I was, thinking that's where I was going to go. I studied for the MCATs, took the MCATs, realized I was burned out from that process, and figured I wanted to do something different. So I was working in an immunology lab at Scripps Research Institute right next to UC San Diego. Enjoyed the research probably, thought about, do I want to get my PhD? Do I want to become a professor? Really enjoyed teaching an upper division, or being a teaching assistant in an upper division nutrition course at UC San Diego. Thought maybe the professor route might be of interest. But in the end, I knew that, working at a big school, research was going to drive most professors. And, while I enjoyed the research, it wasn't necessarily my passion. I knew my passion would have been more around the teaching side of things. And probably didn't know some of the, there's schools that do a better balance of that teacher scholar method than maybe some of the big publics. So who knows, then maybe that would have changed. But was following my running, ran through UC San Diego for 4 years, ran cross country and track, and then had an opportunity after, a couple of years after graduating to come up and run on a post-collegiate track and field team that trained at Stanford. So followed that dream, knowing that I only had a few years left of running in me at a high level. And then figured I had to support my running habit with a real job. So, got myself in a sales position in the Bay Area. And then that company went under after 9/11. And then at that point I said, well, if I can get it Stanford, then it would be conducive for my lifestyle. Cause then after work, I could go across the street to the track and train with my team. So
I did not know that part of your journey. Can I just ask, favorite running memory when you think about all the races and different experiences? Do one or two stand out as being just the best memories?
Yeah, no, I'll give you a high point and a low point, I would say.
Fair enough.
So the high point, certainly on the Nike farm team, I one season I realized that I was anemic, and so my coaches had to dial back my training. Most of the time I was probably on that team, I was overtraining as I was training with Olympic trials caliber athletes, and some of our teammates would make the Olympic teams. And so I was always probably training over my head, but by dialing things back, I remember I got the chance to run my first race back. And in that first race back, slightly undertrained, ran a huge personal best. And so that was kind of a big rewarding. I went from the first lap in the race, I think I was dead last and 30th. And I, down the stretch was, just off the leader in second or third in that race. So that was a fun experience. Probably the low point, but also definitely a memory, was training for my first marathon, and never have trained as hard for one single race. Was running Chicago Marathon with my friend. And, we were on pace running about 5:20 mile pace for 18 miles or so. And then the wheels started to come off. And by the mile 20, when the first aid person saw me, she knew I was in bad shape, and she was trying to convince me to stop at that point. And so I ended up stopping, had to get, escorted to the finish line in an ambulance, which, wasn't fun, but, and then I got out afterwards, after the medical tent, after an hour, trying to figure out how to, find my family and get home. And so that was definitely one of the low points but, certainly, I did several marathons after that, and that was a motivation to try to figure out that race a little bit better.
I appreciate the walk down memory lane, because I know that's not a good one. I'll say that I did do the Boston Marathon in 2015, and there's a decent chance that even with your medical timeout and time spent in the ambulance, that you still beat me. So for whatever that's worth.
Boston was a great memory as well. So when I did Boston, even though I didn't run super fast at that course, just the whole experience is one that every true runner should try to experience.
So the original catalyst to find the more kind of steady job, I mean, I guess you probably were in sales, combination of .com boom, .com bust, and then 9/11. So that had to be a pretty, on a variety of fronts, sort of emotional experience. But what, I guess you showed up at Stanford as that, my understanding is about as junior level as it gets in the development shop. I mean, what was that like initially? And just take me back to maybe those first few weeks or months as you started to settle into what is obviously one of the most impressive fundraising operations in the world?
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't realize at that time how hard it is to get your foot in the door into a development position without prior development experience. And so I was being as creative as I can, getting my resume on every person's desk, at some point, finally, I had a conversation with someone in HR, and she said, you just don't have enough experience. But if, go look and work at a small nonprofit, get some fundraising experience and reapply in a few years. Or she said, you might look at, coming into more of an administrative role. And we don't generally, it's not a normal path that people take, because we tend to hire more, lifetime administrative assistants, but certainly that'll give you an opportunity to kind of learn the field from the bottom up, get a sense of how our database works, understand the intricacies of the process. And I was fortunate enough to work with, get hired to support 2 fundraisers in the class giving, annual giving area. And they really looked to kind of mentor me, as they knew that I wanted to become a frontline fundraiser at some point. So things just were fortunate. And then, a few years after, I started, or a couple of years after I started, then an opportunity opened up to get some management experience and help manage the administrative support team that supported the 14 reunion classes and the 11 class giving officers that Stanford had. And kind of help with the project management of all of those different campaigns. And so I knew that was a step away from my goal of being a frontline fundraiser, but it gave me that management experience, which can be hard for people in the development field to get at some point, which I think then I was able to leverage. So then finally I was able to manage the 10th reunion class at Stanford, get that frontline fundraising experience, and then combined it with my management experience, and that kind of parlayed in my next opportunity to come over to Santa Clara at some point.
So you're at Stanford during the mid-2000s, which was really the birth of the social network platforms. I mean, Facebook was obviously growing in the Bay Area at that time. LinkedIn had emerged out of Reid Hoffman as a Stanford alumnus. Twitter was founded up the road. I mean, so there's sort of this growing, but it was still very early, right? It was before those companies had gone public, and maybe just take me back to what it was like having gone through personally that .com boom. Did you start to feel the boom and bust, but then now sort of being right there in the Silicon Valley with so many of your alumni, I'm sure, with those class reunion campaigns, joining some of these startups pretty early on. Did you feel that at the time, or is it more as you look back in hindsight?
No, you could tell. I remember setting up my first Facebook account and trying to figure out, how do I manage this as a work tool and a social and a personal tool at the same time? And I think that's something that, everyone needs to continue to think about. I was a little hesitant to set up that account at first, but I realized the benefit that it had into my career, and that, this was an essential piece of that. So, but it was also, working at Stanford. Stanford has an amazing alumni base that's full of entrepreneurs, right? And that's really what sets that school apart in so many different ways. And so that entrepreneurial spirit comes out in so many ways. So as you're speaking with alums, you get that sense, so you can feed off of that. I managed the 10th reunion. I tell this story every once in a while. It wasn't uncommon that a 10th reunion alum who's 31 years old is asking me, how do I get onto the board of trustees at Stanford? And that's not a question that you usually hear from that age range too often, but that's kind of the entrepreneurial spirit that you get at a school like Stanford, for sure.
Now, even the way that you describe the structure, there being sort of 2 class giving officers with you as a development assistant or associate supporting that work. I mean, there really is an army of people that are laser focused on as much sort of, I'm sure, personalized fundraising, but also volunteer management to drive those kinds of outcomes. And let's also be honest, there's so much affluence that what would be considered, I'm sure, a mid-level or lower level prospect at Stanford could be a top of pyramid prospect at other institutions. So I'm curious if you had any moments where that maybe it's with the folks that were 31 asking to be on the trustees, where did it just change your perspective on wealth or the potential for philanthropy earlier on in someone's career?
Yeah, Stanford is a machine in what they do, and that's a term that they use. You hear that in their athletics, the Stanford machine, but really around their fundraising as well. I mean, they do it so well. And as you think about, you become very specialized in your field. And as you talked about, a very focused team. And the great thing was I had mentors that allowed me to kind of handle and work closely with their participation. Like they focused on their special gifts committee, and I was able to kind of over time take on a lot of the participation campaigns and work directly with those volunteers. So that kind of grew over time, but you certainly had that sense of, being able to make that difference, work with alums that were passionate. And it's you could just see the impact that alumni had from their experience at Stanford, how they wanted to repay that. And I think, that was the first question that I had to myself when I was considering leaving Stanford, because I didn't necessarily imagine myself leaving there when I did. But I said, as I considered Santa Clara, are Santa Clara alums going to be as passionate about Santa Clara as Stanford alums are as passionate about Stanford? And fortunately, the answer was yes about that. And that made the transition a whole lot easier.
Well, I'd love to hear more about it, because it's one thing to sort of take an entry-level job to help subsidize your running habit. It's another thing to decide that you really want to build your career in this world of advancement. And as you approach 14 years at Santa Clara in a sector where turnover is often talked about, and in a region where there's no shortage of demand for development talent, it's rare for somebody to spend as much time as you have and have the opportunity to grow at an institution like Santa Clara. So you came to that conclusion that there was that latent potential and passion in the community. It's obviously it's a different mission. It's got a different purpose and positioning. But you started, my understanding is, in the Santa Clara Fund, and obviously have now emerged as the leader of the development organization. Just tell me a little bit about, even when you got there, right, in sort of the depths of the financial crisis, and maybe the Bay Area was buffered somewhat, but I would imagine, that was such a different context than sort of where we sit today with wealth creation and asset values and savings rate kind of all having skyrocketed, throughout the pandemic. So I'd just be curious to kind of get your reflection on your impressions early on and where you sit today.
Yeah, initially when I thought, when I spoke with one of my mentors at Stanford about the opportunity to come to Santa Clara, he said, if you want to be a major gift officer, stay at Stanford. You'll have an amazing portfolio to work with, a portfolio that's going to be hard to match at any other institution, right? But if you're interested in more of the management side of things, this is a real opportunity to build a program. And, what you're going to have to really think about is, are you going to have the resources? Are you going to have those resources to be able to build it the way you want, right? And can you see that growth happening? And so that was one of the early conversations I had with my manager at the time that was hiring me is where we see this program going. What direction do they want to go? Do we see the growth potential? And it was really to build out a reunion giving program that was going to be effective and kind of use some of the best practices that we've developed at Stanford, and then figure out how to shape those so they're unique to the Santa Clara culture. Because you can't just replicate things from school to school. You have to figure out how to replicate it and how it's unique and how to make it unique in that new environment. And we were able to do that. And I think I just was fortunate in my timing in coming to Santa Clara. We'd come off a campaign a couple of years prior. We were, in this kind of steady state, but really looking to grow the base, grow our engagement with our alums, and really build a reunion giving program that could sustain giving and kind of build a new platform. We'd also come off, we'd been on a 15-year decline in alumni participation. And so we were looking at how do we start to reverse that downward trend in alumni participation. And, a lot of it was just talking about it, right? Everyone was afraid to talk about why our rates were declining. And, it was kind of, no one wants to market, where they're not succeeding. But if you want to get alumni passionate about something, you have to talk about your strengths and your weaknesses. And a lot of times they're going to get on board to kind of help turn things around. So we were fortunate and able to do that, put together some best practices, start to build a program in reunion giving. And we, raised our alumni participation rate up from a low of, 15% in 2009 up to 25% in 2013. That was a special year where we had an alumni participation challenge. But then we kind of settled back into that steady state right in that, 20 to 22% range, and for about 10 years or so, until the pandemic hit. And to be honest, because of the pandemic, we've seen our alumni participation fall pretty steeply. But I'm hopeful as we come out of this and we are able to put more resources behind this, we'll get that back up into that 20-25% range.
There aren't too many institutions that have during that same time period. Let's just take the pandemic aside, but from, let's call it 2010 to early 2020, to grow alumni participation. Oftentimes folks will cite larger class sizes and other things along those lines, but it sounds like you're able to, in spite of class sizes, raise the absolute participation rate, and then I'm sure the donor count, even more significantly, assuming larger class sizes. And so are there any generalizable themes for somebody that's listening right now, sitting at 10 or 15% participation, but hoping by 2030 to get to the low 20s, that you feel like, look, it needs to be personalized to every institution, but here are just the common themes or the common strategies that are going to be critical if you're going to reverse the decline?
Yeah. I think one of the key things is really education. One of the first new positions that I established when I came over as the Santa Clara Fund director was to create a student and young alum engagement person. We had students graduating from Santa Clara that were getting scholarships, that were benefiting from alumni support, and they didn't quite understand that, right? You can't have that if you want to maintain alumni participation. With growing denominators, with larger class sizes now than 50 years ago, if you want to increase alumni participation, you have to inspire younger alums to give. And it has to be that message of importance of giving and letting them know that gifts of any size make a difference. One of my favorite stories is, one of our trustees at Santa Clara, who's been a very generous donor, her first gift to Santa Clara was a $25 gift during her senior gift campaign. She didn't know at some point she was going to be making $1 million gifts to the university down the line, but she knew that Santa Clara was important, and she knew how she had benefited from the support of others. And so you need to make sure that you take time to educate your students. Make sure that your stewardship team is working with students that are scholarship recipients, so that they really understand the value of where that money came from. They just can't think of it as financial aid. They have to think of it as, this was someone that was an alum or a donor of the university that is looking to help them progress their education and move forward. And so that education part is essential. Now, I think, to be honest, Brent, I think we're in a new time period, right? I think coming out of this pandemic, things are really changing, and we need to be so much more strategic. I just think, we've had the end of our fiscal year, we've had a number of emails that, went out, and one email went out to 20,000 people at a 20% open rate and didn't even get one gift. So we really have to think about our messaging. And I think it's really about personalizing the messages, finding those segments of what that message is going to appeal to people. And I think we really need to, the theme is really leverage technology to do this in a much more efficient manner. Things have to change because people's attention span has changed so much that people, even if they open an email, they might not be reading it, or, they're not making that decision. And then for a lot of people that love going to, love their alma maters, I don't think it's really always a question of whether they should make a gift or not. I think it's, okay, when am I going to pull that trigger? What's going to make me pull that trigger? And that's, as development professionals, if we're focused on increasing alumni participation, or if we care about that, which some might argue maybe that's not as important anymore, we got to figure out what's going to be that trigger point that makes someone make the difference, and take out their credit card or plug that in.
Yeah.
And I think it really comes down to, it's going to come down to this personalization approach.
Yeah.
That sets messages apart nowadays.
We feel strongly about that. And I appreciate you sharing openly the 20,000 emails, 20% open rate, 0% conversion. And I think we have gone through this phase over the last 10 years of marketing automation and marketing journeys and nurturing campaigns and various technologies that allow that. But I think the issue is they allow all companies to do that. And so the way that our inboxes look in 2021 is radically different than the way they looked in 2011. And if there was a short-term arbitrage opportunity for annual funds to leverage some of that mass marketing, digital marketing, it feels like that window is closing because there's just too much noise and other brands are spending too much. And at the same time, I think that we're going to enter this phase in the 2020s, largely accelerated by the pandemic, where we're actually going to get back to basics, where things might look a lot more like they did at Stanford in 2002, when you really had class campaigns rooted in human-to-human engagement and having coordination at the annual fund level. I think a lot of that we can do with technology and be far more efficient than I'm sure you were able to be, just given the time, the technology available in 2002. But I think that there's a greater need for human-to-human engagement than ever before. I don't think we can text message our way to annual fund growth. I don't think we can have a better subject line that turns around the annual fund. I think we've got to find ways to scale relationships. And I think, given that there's been a once in a generation shift in technology adoption, and that every donor from the ages of 17 to 97 now knows what Zoom is, I think that that's going to be a huge advantage for us coming out of this.
Yeah, for sure. It's, and the way video has adapted as well, just, people are expecting everything to be personalized. And if they get any sniff that it's not personalized, I think it just goes straight into the trash,
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right. At the same time, when real personalization happens, I think it stands out now more than ever. And I even think about, with our sales organization, we talk constantly, like, before you hit send on that email, read it and ask yourself, would I enjoy receiving the email I'm about to send? And if the answer is no, then don't send it. And I think that there are good examples in the commercial world of what a great sales experience or a great buyer experience is, and also what a really poor one could be. And I think that there's so much potential here in this space. And I know that you've seen the opportunity over the last year, or you've seen that potential realized by doing some interesting campaigns that align with mission and priorities at Santa Clara, that have allowed you to activate more philanthropic potential. And I know that one example you're excited about is the work with your Black Excellence Fund. And I think that both at an aggregate mission, interest-based fundraising, there's some interesting lessons to learn, but also even at the individual donor level, the before and after experience that you've seen by tapping into somebody's real passions is a good reminder for everyone. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. I always feel like my job at the university is to figure out what someone's passion is and then connect it to a university priority. Sometimes their passion might not align with a university priority and we're not making headway. But when you can do that, it's a win-win, both for the donor and for the university. And the hard part is to figure that out. And, that's what great major gift work is all about, having those conversations, spending that time. But the question is, how do you do it on a mass scale, right? How do you engage more people? But you have to figure out what some of those trends are. And you have to figure out what motivates people. And I'm a firm believer, I certainly am a firm believer of the value of the annual fund and the importance that has in the lifeblood of a university. But if that's the only way you're marketing to people, you're missing out, And I think if that's the first way you're marketing to people, sometimes you're missing out as well. If I feel like I can get someone hooked on giving to the university, eventually they will give to the annual fund as they see the needs of that and the instance and how it can make a difference. But you got to get creative. You got to find those funds that are then to resonate with people. And over this last year, I spearheaded a committee on campus to establish a fund in honor of Black students at Santa Clara, a scholarship fund to help us better recruit and retain and ensure the success of our Black students at Santa Clara. We started off with a conversation of what do we name this, right? It was North Central University kind of challenged people as they had the funeral service for George Floyd, and they announced that they were, establishing the George Floyd Memorial Scholarship. So we looked at that at Santa Clara and said, what do we want to call this? What do we want this to look like? What effect do we want it to have? This committee looked at it, and in the end, we said, well, we can name it after one person or another, but this has to be a fund that's easily marketable, that people know what they're giving to when they support it, and that it's then whether that is now or in 100 years from now, right? We certainly expect that Santa Clara will be around 100 years plus from now, and we'll still be raising money for the Black Excellence Scholarship Fund. So we didn't want to have to tell the story of who George Floyd was and how that resonates in this scholarship, or if we were then to name it after, the first Black student that graduated from Santa Clara in the 1950s, right? That was going to take a little bit out of the marketing of it. So that's why we went with the more generic name. And then we thought there was such an outcry of support around Black Lives Matter at Santa Clara, right around, the George Floyd incident. We actually we put together this fund and we marketed it internally. And we thought that would give us credibility as, before we went to our alumni base, we raised $40,000 from faculty and staff members across the university. And then we launched it publicly and, went out to our alumni constituents. And it's pretty exciting to see the effects that it's had. It's raised over 650 gifts in its first year. It's about $525,000 raised for this endowment. We have the first student getting awarded from the endowment that will start this academic year. We have it for a transfer student this first year. And I'm giving him a tour of Santa Clara tomorrow. So, and this scholarship, when he initially received his financial aid package, he didn't think Santa Clara was feasible and he ruled it out as an option. But with this scholarship, which is a gap scholarship, was able to help yield him to come to Santa Clara. And, he's so thrilled to be able to have this opportunity now. So it's making a real difference, but it's amazing to see people that have given to this scholarship have come out of the woodworks. We've seen $10,000 gifts from people that have never given more than $500 before. And certainly there's people that this scholarship doesn't resonate with, right? We had some alums that weren't inspired by the scholarship, and that's okay too. We just have to figure out what their passion is. And so that's what our job is as development officers.
Can I ask you a question? First of all, thank you for sharing. And when you talk about the importance of education and that being an important part of the growing participation, especially if you're going to target younger alumni with growing class sizes, I feel like the way that stewardship works today, now you've got this Black Excellence Fund, you've got a couple of students who are going to be beneficiaries. I'm sure you're already thinking about how do we tell their story, right? How do we track their journey? And then how do we communicate that back to those 650 donors so that they become hopefully perpetual or even larger donors to this fund? That would be my guess. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. What I'm talking about with the student when I'm giving him a tour tomorrow is, convincing him to do a little video that we can say that the scholarship made the difference for him. This is why he's coming to Santa Clara. I mean, that's
But
going to resonate with our donors to that. They're just going to feel great about, they actually enabled a student to come to Santa Clara who wasn't able to come because of this.
so here's what I'm wondering is there an opportunity to flip that model, that sort of tried and true stewardship model, and the more that we can make it personalized versus mass marketing, the better, but applying the same approach in reverse from an education perspective? Like, nobody's ever asked me, I made my donations to Brown and Harvard yesterday, and I know that they go to the fund and it's the best use. Nobody's ever said, hey, could you make a video and address it to Mike, the student, because Mike's going to be a beneficiary, maybe not directly, but he's going to be a beneficiary of your donation. Would you be willing to make a video telling Mike, the student who's a junior, about why you gave and introducing yourself? Like, what if we asked donors to not only cut the check, but also cut the 30-second video, and came up with a way to distribute that to the students who are beneficiaries in pursuit of that customer education? I feel like we're constantly saying, students, we need you to thank the donors. I don't know if we ever have donors explain to the students why they just made this donation. Have you heard of anything like that? Am I on the right track? Because it seems like that's the sort of thing that via technology isn't out of the question. And in the past, it might have happened at a scholarship banquet that people who live within 30 minutes of the institution might have attended. But what about a global alumni population?
Yeah, Brent, I love that idea, and seeing how we can maybe roll that out on a mass scale, right? We've done similar types of things like that on the major gift side of things, right? We've had scholarship donors. I've set up in this past year Zoom calls with scholarship donors who have established an endowed scholarship with their recipients, so that they get to tell the story of what inspired them to establish that scholarship. Then they get to meet the student and hear the impact, and it's this love fest, right?
Yeah.
And even through Zoom, it's become, it still is a love fest. We had our scholarship luncheon online this past year, and usually that's a luncheon on campus, but it was just as successful because we did some breakout rooms. We had donors with their recipients. And there's this intimacy with Zoom that sometimes you get that you might not get at a larger event, and you can involve and engage people that don't live within 30 minutes or an hour of campus. And as we all become, much more, national and global universities, we need to think about how are we engaging our alums across the country who can't make it to campus that easily.
Yeah.
But I do love, and that's always this idea of how do we get this on a mass side and employ it on the annual fund side of things. But we could do something like that, encourage the donor to make their gift, but also tell their story. And for students to hear that is so important, because that's only going to help that education for them to become that lifelong donor as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think even look, it's July 1st, right? A lot of people just renewed or made their first gift in the last 30 days. You could almost imagine, even if it were just a compilation of donors explaining like, hey, here's why I supported you. And, I wish you nothing but the best on your student journey. And just as a way to kind of, support education and personalization, but also let students know that, it's real people out there, right? When we announce these donor totals and the big revenue numbers, it's really the Brents and the Mikes and all of our other, fellow donors that are real people who used to be students, in the same location as you are. So I don't know. I feel like that's an angle where there's so much innovation happening around stewardship. I mean, I think even like you just said, being able to create the Zoom experience and connect people who otherwise couldn't be connected, probably in a better, less noisy, like more comfortable environment than a dinner. Not to mention how much more trackable some of that becomes. Maybe we can start to apply the same approaches from donor to student. So more to come. Who knows? Maybe a year from now, that's the campaign we're launching, Mike. All right.
I love it.
All right. Well, you've mentioned mentorship several times, and this is a tight-knit industry, and obviously maybe it's not obvious, but so many of our guests on the podcast have cited the importance of mentorship. Who are some of the people who stand out to you specifically, and what have you taken away from them as your mentors?
Yeah, a few stand out in my early career at Stanford for sure. John Denny, who's the head of development now, and Martin Schell. Just amazing individuals. And I think one of the great things about them is, they didn't care what level position you were in, right? They weren't hierarchical in any way. And they were at a huge development organization, right? This wasn't a small shop. And so, I look back at that experience and I knew that they knew what they wanted, what was best for me as an individual.
Can I ask how you felt that? We just published an episode with Amy Noah, who's the new head of the foundation at the University of Oklahoma. And she specifically said, this can be a pretty hierarchical sector. What was it about Martin and John's leadership that made it feel not that way?
Yeah. With John, I think a great example of it, is that conversation I had with him about, the opportunity at Santa Clara to, go from a class giving officer to really start a reunion giving program and be the head of the annual fund at Santa Clara. And just say, Mike, if this is what you want to do, have these candid conversations about your own career progression, then you should really take this opportunity. And, he said at one point, though, he's like, I'm going to recruit you back. And, to be honest, that was one of the hardest decisions I had to make and say no to, is when he did come back and recruit me back. And I had the opportunity to have an opportunity to grow my, experience at Santa Clara versus go back to Stanford, which is always where I thought I was going to go when I first came over. And so it's that type. I think we all need to think of people as individuals and how we grow them. But also it's just the personalness, it's the funniest story, but I felt like, whenever in the afternoon I'd go to the bathroom at Stanford, I was always running into Martin Schell. And I'm like, gosh, guys, I'd tell my colleagues, this is so weird. Like, we're on the same bathroom schedule. But it's just that chit chat that you might have in the hallway, the chit chat you have, in the bathroom that goes to show that, like, gosh, Martin cares about, a class giving officer working, as much as he does his principal gift officer. Right. And I think great leaders show that, and I remember having a conversation with Martin when he was encouraging me, when John and Martin were encouraging me to come back to Stanford. And he said, Martin was saying, Mike, I always try to make sure that, that I hire smart people and put them in the room and empower them. I want to be the least intelligent person in that room. And that's how I know I'm setting up a successful room. And just, to hear him say that, someone who has had as much success as he had, to realize that, hey, he doesn't need to be the smartest person in the room to run a successful organization. I think that goes a long ways. And then to be able to have that conversation with someone in the hallway who, you might not think of taking that extra minute out of your day, but great managers find a way to do that, I think.
I love it. Well said. And I actually think, as much as I am an advocate for remote work, and I think it's going to transform our work at Evertrue, I think it's going to transform the advancement sector over time. It is those hallway conversations, and maybe it's the pep talks or that sort of additional perspective you were able to gather that I don't think we've figured out how to replicate yet in this remote context. And that's something I'm thinking a lot about, just even in my own leadership style. I'm curious, as you think about fiscal year 22 kicking off today, relative to this sort of remote by not by choice, but we had to be remote. What is the future of remote at Santa Clara broadly, or at the advancement organization specifically, or is it too early to say?
We're actually putting a lot of thought into what that looks like, right? We've surveyed our, members of university advancement. We've gotten a sense of what people want. We're trying to think about how do we create that balance, right? We all, there's something that's really important as you put new fundraisers together. I've never been a big fan of putting fundraisers in their own offices. I think people really learn in bullpens. They need to listen to that conversation across the cube and listen to how someone is interacting with a donor, even though they might just be hearing one side of the conversation. That little interaction goes a long way, especially for newer fundraisers. And there's so much collective learning that happens. So I'm a big fan of making sure that happens, but I think there's a lot of opportunity. And a lot of people have shown over this past year that we can be successful working remotely as well. So how do we have that balance? So I think, as we think about, we're still kind of refining what that will look like. I imagine we'll start blending back into the office in August, September, really take the fall quarter to really try out a number of different things. But I imagine that there will be some of that balance. So there will be an ability to maybe work remotely, 1 or 2 times a week, and really find some times to think about when we're together. And I think the key will be is doing the work that you're most successful at in that type of mode, right? So we all need those times when we're focused and we're quiet, and that's the best type of work to do when we're working remotely. And then we need that type of time when we're working more collaboratively, and we need to, schedule that type of work to do when we're working together as well.
What are you excited about over the next year besides your RV trip and then next week?
I think I was just talking with my annual giving team is how are we going to do this? How are we going to turn these numbers around? We actually had a decent year fundraising totals. We had some larger gifts, but as I said, our alumni participation, probably will hit an all-time low, knowing especially that, we were down, probably 25% of our staff because positions were frozen. We didn't operate our student call center this past year because we weren't able to employ student callers. So there's a lot of donors that have given to Santa Clara that haven't been engaged in a more personal way. And we're really trying to think about how can we do that in a much more meaningful way? Can we personalize video to them? How can we personalize some of the interactions? How do we create a cadence of communications that breaks through the fray that's out there, right? We need to break through the distraction rate that everyone has and get our alums to know that we care what they think about, right? We don't want them to just give to, a specific fund at Santa Clara. We want to find what their passion is and get them to passionately support that at Santa Clara. So I think that, I'm excited looking at this next year of how we're going to use this, how we're going to integrate some new technology, we're going to be reinstituting some text to giving, some video, a number of different ways but I think, the tried and true email large populations, even if you're merging in someone's salutation, that's not going to work anymore, right? We got to figure out a new plan. And I think that's what excites me is coming up with those new solutions, those aha moments that we're going to find success in this next year. Some things are going to fail, but some things are going to really work. And when you hit on those things that work, it makes it all that much more rewarding.
Yeah, I think you've got to be in the primary inbox, not the marketing tab. I think it's got to be truly personalized, not pretend personalized. And I think, mail mergers are not going to be the panacea that maybe folks thought at one point. You mentioned the challenges around budget cutbacks, freezes, and so forth. Is that starting to thaw? Are there going to be opportunities if there are folks listening and thinking about their next step to consider opportunities at Santa Clara?
Yeah, for sure. We're just gotten some approvals to start to hire some positions back. So we're looking strategically on that. I think, it's never easy to hire great development talent. There's not enough of it out there. We have to think about how we grow that internally. I think as we also look at the DEI lens, we need to do a better job of promoting opportunities of working in university advancement with our students at Santa Clara, right? Or our students at whatever university we're at. Let's go talk to those Black student chapters and encourage them to say, hey, have you ever thought of this? when I was a student, I didn't know what development was. I mean, I didn't know what this was all about. I did hear one of my friends worked in a call center. I was like, oh, that's interesting. They call alums, ask them for money. So, people tend not to, people tend to fall into development, right? It's not a chosen career path. It's starting to become that as more and more, as this field professionalizes over time and more people are interested in it. But we got to do a better job of marketing that. And I think we can certainly do a better job of marketing the great opportunities that are here working at a college campus to some of our students from diverse backgrounds. And I think that's going to make a difference.
I think that's a great point. And especially as you have programs like the Black Excellence Fund, how do you create the full cycle opportunity, which is we're going to support more students of color, Black students joining the university, succeeding at the university, but also we're going to go out of our way to make sure that population understands what an entry-level development assistant role, exactly like the one you had in 2002, is like today. And I think it's one thing if you and your peers in the advancement sector are having those conversations with pockets of diverse students and getting rejected in that there is not a mutual interest. It's another thing if we're not having those conversations. And it's hard for any company, right? I think that the awareness around DEI and really being intentional about diversity is obviously more top of mind, I think, than ever before. We don't have an inherent talent pool and student population the way that all of our advancement partners do. And so that's the big question, is just, are we trying to recruit diverse students and failing, or have we not really tried? And if we haven't really tried, what could we do to get intentional about that? And it sounds like that's top of mind for you.
Yeah. We have people that love this university. They've already been sold on how great this university is. We just need to sell them on this is a career path, right? And
totally.
You can be successful in this career path. And the great thing about this career path is once you get experience, there's a whole lot of opportunity. There's not a day that goes by that I don't get, some type of recruiter reaching out about this position or that position in my email or phone. And I'd be foolish to think that doesn't happen with all of my staff as well. So I know that that happens. And what we need to do is we need to find that we hire the right people that care about this university and know what's unique about this university. And those are the people that are going to stay here, right? I've been here 13 and a half years. And I've been here not because there hasn't been other opportunities. I've been here because I know what's special about this university. And I feel that we can continue to make a difference. And those are the types of people that eventually, we want to hire and encourage to come and work at Santa Clara.
All right. So you don't have to name names, but when you think about the best development professionals that you've worked with over the years, what are some of the traits or characteristics or words that come to mind to describe those people relative to middle or below performers?
Brent, you're stealing one of my interview questions.
Boom. Then you should be ready to go. Here we go.
Yeah, surprising. So my interview question is, especially when I'm talking to someone that has some development experience, is, what's the difference? What do you think makes the difference between a good fundraiser and a great fundraiser? If it's about building relationships, that's not even a good fundraiser, right? So I think some of those great fundraisers that I've worked with, that I've had, that I enjoy seeing, do their work day in and day out. It's really the strategic aspect that they bring into this. Really, they're great listeners. They're thinking about they're listening for those keywords. They're listening to what inspires someone, and then they can help develop those opportunities and connect them into those opportunities at Santa Clara. And I think that's where you start to see transformational gifts happen. Those transformational gifts don't usually happen with the annual fund, right? You're not just selling the annual fund. It's you're finding that person's passion and finding a way to unfold that passion so that it can make a huge impact at the university. And so I think that's ultimately one of the most important aspects of a great fundraiser, is that ability to think to listen well and think strategically.
I think I might rephrase my question and borrow your interview question from now on in future episodes.
All right. I love it.
All right. Well, hey, we need to wrap up here. If folks want to get in touch with you, I know you're on LinkedIn. Is that the right channel, or is there a better way to get in touch?
Yeah, you can reach me on LinkedIn, or, you can go to Santa Clara University's development page. If you go to scu.edu/giving and click on the contact page, you can click through to me there. But Brent, it's been a pleasure, taking time. I love working with you, and I always think, what I love about Evertrue is always they're thinking ahead. And so it's been a pleasure to be a partner with you over these years, and I'm looking forward to how that partnership continues into the future.
Thanks, Mike. We appreciate it. There's so much to do, right? I mean, I think we've made good progress in the last few years, but we haven't solved the problem yet. And I think that's what gets me fired up and keeps my team really engaged. Is it feels like reversing some of these declines, or really blending automation without sacrificing personalization. This is all doable. We're not quite there yet, but we couldn't figure it out without great partners like you and your colleagues. So thank you for your support on the journey. And I would just encourage anybody listening, reach out to Mike. Don't be shy. Super thoughtful, just a really genuinely nice person that you should all get to know. And with that, I am going to wish Mike and his family the absolute best travels on their RV adventure. Brent, signing off from the home office in McGregor, Iowa, where we have electricity, running water, and all the trappings of modern civilization. Take care.
Take care, Brent.